Hey data nerds, this is John and welcome to another episode. Today we're going to be looking at how to build the service level charts that you see from the Joint Monitoring Program for Water and Sanitation and Hygiene. If you're not familiar with the JMP, you should definitely go to washdata.org and learn more about the work they do, which includes setting standards for how to measure services like water, sanitation, hygiene, and menstrual hygiene. What you typically see in a JMP chart is something that looks like this. You have your service levels, as they call them, or ladders, as some people call them, where you have progressive realization of the targets or the goal. So what we're trying to do is measure, progress toward some end state that we're trying to achieve, which is usually, the highest level of service. In this case, we want everybody to have a hand washing station with water and soap in their house or on their property. So if we go to this document real quick, I'm just going to show you the Jmp Service Ladders here. For hygiene, we have 3 levels. There's 5 levels for water and sanitation, but hygiene is a little bit simpler because it basically boils down to whether you have a hygiene facility for hand washing and whether you have soap and water present. We use the observation of soap and water as what's called a proxy indicator. That means we can't observe whether people actually wash their hands or not. That would take a long time and people would probably behave differently if we were watching them, obviously. So what we do is we check to see if there's water and soap, which are taken as evidence or a proxy for the use of the facility. If somebody has soap at their sink, they're probably using that soap. If there's no soap, then they're definitely not using it. So that's how we classify these things. And if you look at the ladders here, basically we have basic service, which is the highest level. That means they have a hand washing facility on premises with soap and water. So there's 4 parts of this question. Now, it's not normal in a survey to ask, do they have this, this, or this? Because it's very complicated and hard for people to understand when you ask multiple things in one question. So what we tend to do in surveys is ask individual questions, and then in analysis, we use the results of those individual questions to calculate a single outcome like basic service. And that's exactly what we've done in this household survey in Kenya. If you look at the survey, this is a section on hand washing. We first ask, can you show me a place where your household washes their hands? They can either say yes, they can say no, we don't have a facility, or they can say no, you can't go see it. It's always a possibility that they just refuse the observation or couldn't be completed for some reason. Then if they say yes, we ask the enumerator to observe the type of hand washing facility, either fixed, mobile, like a bucket or jug, or actually no facility after all. And then we ask them to say where it's located and whether there's soap or water present at the time of the observation. So those are our 4 questions that we're interested in here, plus a 5th one that is basically asking, can we observe these things? Okay, so let's go back to MWater. Here's the chart we're trying to build, where we have these service levels kind of stacked up. I've disaggregated here by rounds of the survey. We had a round in December and a round in March. That's what the round means. So let's build this chart. First, we're going to drag a chart in. Remember, my dashboard here is already in edit mode. So I'll drag a chart next to this one. And I'm going to get rid of this spacer here that I was just using to make that chart half width. Now we have 2 charts, so that's going to work fine. So first thing I'm going to do is click on the chart to choose a type. This is a bar chart. And my data source is going to be the household survey. Now I need to specify a horizontal axis. Those are the bins that the bars are going to represent. In this case, I have the rounds of the survey that I want to show, but you may not have a survey with separate rounds, and you may just want to show a single bar. We don't really have an option explicitly for that in MWater, but there's a trick where you could use it to get what you're after there. If you just pick some standard thing about the survey, like the status, for example, you could turn off all the other categories like this until you only have one bar of final responses. And then you could split this bar as we want to do for the service levels. So that's just a little trick you can use if you just wanted to have a bar chart with a single bar. But in our case, we're actually trying to show a bar for each round of the survey. Now, I have a variable called survey round that I created in the survey. Go look into MWater calculations or expressions if you want to learn more about how to make those. So I basically made this variable that just takes the deployment of the survey and figures out which round it is based on the deployment. That already has been calculated. So if I click on that, now there's a problem here. You'll see I get it, that's a number. It's 1 or 2, but MWater doesn't know that it's only 1 or 2. That, you know, it thinks it's a number that could vary anywhere between those numbers. So it puts it into these bins. Not exactly what we want. We could mess around with the bins and take them out and stuff, but what I tend to do instead is, instead of going that way, there's a function in MWater that's really handy here called convert to text. And all it does is what it says. It takes a number and turns it into a text instead of a number. So that tells MWater, think of this as a text field, not a number field. So if I go grab that survey round again, now MWater thinks there's only 2 values because there was only a 1 or a 2. And I can rename these 2, which is really handy. So if I just click on this, I'll change this to round 1 to be more clear. And we'll change this to round 2. Great, so I've got my round 1 and my round 2. You can see there's 858 surveys done in each round. So now what I need to do is split these by the service levels. And the way that we do that is by going down here to split axis and clicking on that select field. And as we mentioned before, we don't have a single question that we can pick that has the service levels of, as they're defined by the JMP. So what we need to do here is create an expression, which is basically a calculation in MWater that classifies the different survey responses based on the answers to several different questions. The way you do that is to go over here to the Formula tab. And the easiest way is to pick the if-then function. If-then is basically a logical function that says, and here it is, if something is true, then the result should be this. So whenever you have if-then, you have an if and a select box, and then a select box for what the result should be. So what we're going to do here is build a series of if-then statements that classify all of these survey responses into different categories or bins that correspond to the Jmp service levels. So what we want to do whenever we have an if-then statement like this, you want to start with the most restrictive category first, because what MWater will do is go from top to bottom when you have multiple if statements. It'll start with the first one, and anything that meets the first one will get classified and taken out of the mix, so the next one will only be able to classify what's left. So what we want to pick here is the basic service level, which is the highest because it has the most restrictions. It has to be on premises with soap and water, and of course the facility has to exist, right? Let's go back to our if statement and start building the conditions that define the highest service level. The first one is the facility has to exist. Now there's a couple of ways I could go about this. Remember, we have a question that says, can I observe the facility? But we also have a question that asks about the type of facility. So the can I observe is really just asking the respondent, can I do something? But we want to base this indicator result on an observation. If you can decide, in some surveys you can only ask a household member about something. But if your survey is based on observation, you have a little bit higher certainty that there's not some ambiguity in what you asked and what they answered. Direct observation is always better in most cases. And we want to base our indicator results on the observation, not on the question that was asked, whenever possible. So what I'm going to do is pick the type of hand washing facility. That's the first time that the enumerator actually looks at the facility. And you'll see I've got it automatically adds is any of, that's a linking word, that's fine. And now I need to pick select. So here I've got 3 choices: a fixed facility, a mobile object, or actually no facility. So it's always possible that somebody says, yeah, I have a hand washing facility, because they know that's what the answer should be. They know that's what they're expected to say. But then when you go to observe it, it turns out it's not really a hand washing facility, or you can't find it when they look for it, or any kind of possibility like that. So we always want to have that possibility for no facility accounted for. So in this case, if they said it's a fixed facility or a mobile object, those are the only 2 possibilities for the type. So we've covered that there is a facility by picking those 2. So we'll pick those. And you notice that it doesn't do anything yet because I haven't defined the outcome yet, but that's okay. We're just going to keep building this until we're ready. So in addition to there being a facility at all, it has to be located on premises. So we're going to add an AND statement here. That means all these things must be true. And when you click on AND, you get an AND with a bar through it that connects the 2 questions that you're linking. So we're building, again, an expression here, and in MWater, expressions are visual, so you can see how they're being calculated. It's no code or programming or anything like that. So I'll click on select and go up here to my survey. And here's the question about where is the facility located. We're going to pick is any of indwelling or in yard or plot. So we put our second condition on. Now there's 2 more. There's water and soap are present. Those are separate questions. So we'll go here back to our observation of hand washing, and here's the water question. Is water available? Is any of yes? And finally, let's add the last condition, which is having to do with soap. Is soap available? Is any of yes? Okay, so these are the 4 conditions that define basic service according to the JMP. Now what I need to do is say, what are we going to call this outcome? That's the then select. So I'll go over here to select for that. And now it puts me into the value pane automatically. Instead of picking a field here, we're actually going to type a value. So we're going to call this basic service. Click OK. And as soon as I name it, MWater splits the chart. Now we have the percentage or the number, over here with basic service in each round. And all the rest get thrown into this category of none. You'll see in an if-then statement, there's always an optional else value. So if I put something for else, it would no longer have none because everything would be classified either as this or that. Usually I leave that blank because it helps me to know if I've missed something as I'm making these different if statements as I go. So I'll leave that alone for now. And next we're going to add the next service rung on the ladder, which is limited service. Limited service means there's a hand washing facility on premises, but not with soap or water necessarily. So the way you add another if statement, if you go down here at the bottom of the expression, you'll see the very last thing here is plus if. If I click on plus if, I get another if statement that's linked right below the first one. And remember, again, these are evaluated in order from top to bottom. So I'm going to click on select for that if statement. And now I need to go back and say basically the same thing as before. There needs to be a facility in the first place. So the type of facility needs to be any of these 2 possibilities. And it needs to be located on premises. So I'm going to click and select, come down here back to where is the facility located, is any of on dwelling or on yard or plot. So those are the 2 conditions for limited service. And I'll go back over here. Remember, we need to pick what that outcome is called and click on select. And we'll call this limited. And now it's classified 100 here and about 125 here as limited. So you can see in this community, unfortunately, very few people have the highest level of basic service, and not even that many have a facility at all on site, which is unfortunate. So now we need to further classify the remainder. We still have this none, which is most of the people, right? Most of the houses. Now, you could just assume that all the rest have no facility, but there's some other possibilities that you need to account for. That has to do with ones that were not observed, or incomplete data, questions that weren't answered, that would have classified it as one of these, but because they didn't answer the question, it didn't get classified. So we always want to look into that. So whenever you have a lowest service level here, like no facility, even though it seems like you could just call the rest no facility, it's better to define that as well, like you have the other ones. So let's add another if statement. And no facility, we need to think of the possible responses that would mean there's no facility. So first of all, you'll recall there were two questions. One is, can you show me the place where you wash your hands? And the other is, what type of facility is it? So it's possible that when we ask, can you show me the place where you wash their hands? They said, there is no place, right? So the first thing we're going to do is pick that and pick is any of. No facility exists, so people might say there is no facility. Now, there's another possibility that they said there is a facility, but when the enumerator went to see it, they realized it's not really a facility or that they couldn't find it. So let's make another statement here. Now, in this case, we don't want to use and because that would mean both the things need to be true. We actually want either of them to be true to trigger this outcome. So the way you do that is with an or statement. Just like when you're speaking, if you say this or that, then this, then that means either one could be true. We get another select here, and we're going to go to pick the question about type of facility. And here we're going to say is any of no facility. So remember, that's where they went to observe the facility. The person said there was one, but they didn't find one when they got there. Or it didn't classify as a hand washing facility. Okay, let's name this outcome no service. And we're expecting this to take most of the remaining responses. And it does, as we expect. Here, 711 and 677 fall into that category of no service. Now, what about these 21 here and 3 here that still don't have a classification? This means that MWater went here, said, is this true? No. Is this true? No. Is this true? No. And got to the else, there's no else given, so it just says, okay, none. There is no classification for this household. So what we'd like to do is find a classification that covers all those remaining people so that we know that we didn't mess up or miss something. So what I like to do here is make another if statement. And this is going to be something like the not observed or could not observe or don't know or whatever. There's often a category like that whenever you're trying to analyze service levels. So first we're going to pick, the first possibility is they literally just said you can't observe it. That was one of the answers to can you show me where you wash your hands? So let's pick that question. Can you show me where you wash your hands is any of no permission to see or could not observe for some other reason. Those are the other possibilities there. And we also want to account for the possibility that they maybe didn't answer some questions. But first, let's see how we're doing just with this. This should take out a lot of the nones right away. So let's go here and say this is could not observe. Okay, so, and by the way, you see MWater changes the colors every time you add a new category. That's why I'm not coloring things yet. We'll do that last because every time you change something up here, it recolors it. It's just the way it works. So over here, we can see we've really reduced the nones. We only got 4 nones over here and no nones over in round 2. So most of those unclassified ones were where the people literally said you can't observe the facility. But remember, so let's think about the other possibilities. It's possible that the enumerator didn't answer some of the questions. If you look at the survey, you'll notice none of these questions are mandatory except for the first one that, is asking, can I observe? We always make consent questions like this mandatory because we want to make sure that the enumerator asks the person whether they have permission to do something. That's part of your responsibility in ethics and surveying. But it's also possible that they answered that question, said yes, but then didn't answer the other questions afterward. Now, you may be saying right now, why don't you make all of those questions mandatory? And we could have done that. The problem is we don't like to do that in a large household survey because there's always possible situations that you don't think of when you're writing questions. It's less likely with well-tested questions like these, but it's always possible that maybe you should have had a don't know or a could not observe response or something like that, where maybe the person went to observe where it is and they couldn't really determine whether it was in the yard or plot or elsewhere. Maybe it was impossible to tell because of the informant didn't know or they didn't understand where the boundaries were. So there's always those possibilities that you want to account for when you're conducting a survey. So we rarely make these follow-up questions mandatory. It's best for your people who are doing supervision of the survey to keep an eye on those responses and the things that should be answered. That's why it's important to review every response, but there's always a few that slip through the cracks in a large survey of 800 or 1,000 households. So going back to our chart here, you can imagine one of the most obvious possibilities is they said, yeah, you can observe it, but then they didn't answer the type question, which is how we decided whether there was a facility or not. So let's take that into account here by adding an or statement to our could not observe. So we're going to make another possibility that would also classify as could not observe. Click on select. And here we're going to go to the type of facility again. Now, in this case, we want to account for the fact that they did not answer that question, not that they gave a certain answer. So what you can do here is click on is any of, which is the linking word. Change that to is blank, which is a very useful little tool here in MWater. Once you do that, you can see that, let's see, no responses got classified that way, so that is not the issue here. But it does account for, the possibility that someone didn't answer that question. So that probably doesn't look like our issue here with these 4 nones. But if you're watching closely and thinking about this, there is one possibility that I have not accounted for yet. And that is that if you think about it, going back to the top, we said, do they have a facility? And is it located, in their dwelling or yard or plot? Then in the second one, we asked, do they have a facility? Is it in the dwelling or plot? The third one, we ask, do they say they don't have a facility? Or did we not observe one? We didn't account for the fact that they might have one, but it's not located in the household, yard, or plot. So what we've done here is we've missed a possibility of no service that we need to add. So I'm going to go add another or statement here. And here I'm going to account for that possibility by clicking on the location question again. Where is the facility located? Is any of elsewhere? And look at that. We've gotten rid of our none category. Everything has been classified as basic, could not observe, limited, or no service. So that's really great. Now what we need to do is make the chart look more the way we want it to look. Again, it's always important to do all of your calculations first, then worry about aesthetics of the chart, because anything that you change up here will mess up all the aesthetics that you set, such as the color and the configuration. So let's go down here. First I'm going to do is make these look like the Jmp colors. We've got purple, yellow, and kind of dark gold here. So let's pick for basic service purple. Nice Jmp purple there. Now we have a little problem here. You can see that these are out of order. We want basic, limited, no service, and could not observe. But what happens actually is MWater orders these alphabetically. There's no way to change this right now. We'd love to change it someday. It's in the loop for upgrades in the future, but right now we just have to deal with it. Fortunately, there's a really easy way to work around this. If you don't mind changing the name of this to something that would be alphabetized last, like N, not observed. Now I have basic, limited, no service, and not observed. You can always put A, B, C, D in front of them or something like that if you want to also trick it into doing it the way in the order that you want. Hopefully someday soon we'll have the reordering of these as an option. But for now you can do a little trick like that. Okay, so let's go back, see how it recolored everything again, like I said earlier. So I need to pick purple again for basic. Limited, remember, is like a yellowish. If you use bright yellow, it's hard to see, so often what I'll do is pick a slightly darker yellow like this. No service is like an orange color, maybe a darker one. And usually for not observed, I pick something that's gray, like this. Okay, so great. We have a chart. Now, one thing we should look at now is our axes. We have an axis here that is in actually numbers of households. That's usually not what we're interested in when we're making comparisons from one round to the next. So what I probably would want to do here is pick proportional instead of absolute. What that does is it divides each of these categories into 100% and divides them out. So this is much more useful. I can see between round 1 and 2, the proportion with limited service went up slightly. The proportion with basic service went up slightly. Now the margin of error on this survey is plus or minus 5%, so it's hard to say whether that's a significant change, but if we see it continue over subsequent rounds, maybe that's a positive development. So now I've got my axis is now in percent, so let's label that. Remember, we always label axes. Go to our vertical axis label, show it, and we're going to call that percentage of households. And one last thing that we might want to do to make it easier to see these things, as a portion of a whole, is to make them stacked. So if you just click on stacked here, you get this nice, stacked percentage chart. They all add up to 100. You can see that the not observed is actually very small. In each case, 2% here and 0.3 there. So that's good. If you are not really interested in that, you can turn those off. Although remember, it does change all the other percentages. So I usually leave it in to show that we've thought of the possibility that we couldn't observe and then we've accounted for it. Just depends on what point you're trying to make or how you're trying to use the data. So here's our chart. Looks pretty good. Let's give it a title, something like Household Hygiene Service Level. I'll put Jmp in brackets. And X this out, and there we are. We have a chart. Looks exactly like what we were trying to build here. And it's useful for telling us whether we're making progress toward the ultimate goal, which is to provide everybody in the county or in the district with the basic level of hygiene service. So I hope this has been fun. Oh, and one last thing. Remember, you can always download this data. So if you needed to make a table of this data or you needed to know what those numbers were for a report or something, just export that data directly from the chart. That way you can always recreate this as a pivot table by doing basically the same steps, but if you just wanted to get the data to put into a report or something in the table, you can just export it directly here. Very handy feature. All right, so I hope you've enjoyed this and look forward to talking to you next time. Thanks.